Few events in the history of mankind can be really considered universal, transcending cultures and eras to the point in which, no matter where a human being was born or raised, he or she will have heard about the fate of those who took place in them. These events had the power to produce a tangible effect on the thoughts, dreams, aspirations and worries of several people, shaping their imagination and, ultimately, their fate as well. Among these rare and important events, especially for the history of the Western world, the life of Caesar and the tale of his assassination are without the shadow of a doubt some of the most important. Countless historical figures pondered this tale when taking their next step, and countless artists were inspired by it when producing their plays, paintings, or films. What differentiates us from many of those people who lived in the past is the fact that the nature of the modern world is such that we do not need to entirely imagine it, but we can relive it through the work of generations of archaeologists, historians, and more recently, through historical reconstructions, delving deeper into it, with a degree of comprehension which is greater than ever. Join us therefore in this project of ours, where we try to explore in detail the assassination of Caesar, researching in depth the place in which it took place and its history, together with the political and social situation in which Roman society versed at the time, all brought to life by the work of historical reenactors, who every year meet in Rome to make sure that the memory of this event may resonate now more than ever. How we often try to explore and explain in our films, as more modern Romans ourselves, it is interesting to know where we are geographically. When I was a child, having seen references of the event in movies, cartoons, or even commercials, I always wondered where exactly Caesar met his end. Of course, the city is Rome, and it is well known that the murder took place during a meeting of the Senate. The logical conclusion would be to think that the place in which the murder was consumed would be the Senate itself, or the Curia, as the building was called. This, since it is there that anciently the assemblies of the differing founding tribes, or Curia, would meet. Even though this would be the logical conclusion, you would be wrong. The Curia was to be found inside of the beating heart of the city, the Forum, placed at the foot of the Capitoline and Palatine hills, and at the time, the section which contained the building was under works of renovation and embellishment under the desire of Caesar himself. But in order to understand this in more detail, let's take a step back and take a look at the history of the institution itself. The Curia, in fact, lived through several different incarnations along the centuries, and the period of civil wars that characterized the time of Caesar caused its ultimate demolition and reconstruction, reason for which our protagonist decided to undertake the task of restoring it. As the story goes, originally, the Curia was built by the third of the 7 legendary kings of Rome, Tullus Hostilius, to house 300 senators. It was not a casual number, but was full of significance and dated back to the foundation of the city itself. According to the legend, the first king Romulus organized the inhabitants of Rome into 3 main tribes, the Ramnes, Titias, and Luceres. There are several theories about the reason why the subdivision in 3 groups was made. According to some, it represented the geographical division of Rome into 3 different neighborhoods, delimited by the main hills at the center of the archaic city, the Palatine, Capitoline, and Cillian hills. According to others, the original subdivision in tribes reflected the ethnic and linguistic makeup of the founding fathers, in part Latins from Alba Longa and other cities of the League to the south, in part Sabines from the hills and mountains to the east, following the infamous kidnapping of the Sabine women, and in part Etruscans, coming from the land on the northwestern shore of the river Tiber. Whatever be the case, it is generally accepted that the subdivision in the 3 tribes was the reason for much of the city's organization at the time. For example, the initial monarchic army counted 3,000 infantrymen and 300 horse riders, 1,100 to be offered and recruited respectively by each of the 3 tribes. Similarly, to counsel the king, help to administrate the state, and even to counteract his power, in a purely Indo-European fashion, a council of the elders of the main families was instituted, 100 for each tribe, or 300 in total, the Senate. This number remained stable all the way from the foundation of the city for almost 7 entire centuries. However, if someone was searching for a proof of the turmoil existing towards the ending years of the Roman Republic, in the century that preceded the birth of Christ, the huge transformations which touched the Senate as an institution, but also the Curia as a building, would certainly be among it. It is around 80 BC, in fact, that the Curia was increased in its size in order to house 300 new senators, for a total of 600, as per the order of the dictator Sulla. The new incarnation of the building was not to survive too long, because after just 3 decades, in 52 BC, it was demolished in a fire which sprawled due to riots after the death of Publius Clodius Pulcher, a political man involved in several scandals, even transitioning from patrician to plebeian and championing for them. Such a monumental change, like the people burning down the Senate house during riots, might surprise. But as mentioned before in the film, the century which preceded the birth of Christ was a century of great political and social turmoil for the Roman Republic. The constant struggle for power and gaining of rights on the behalf of the people, the plebs, antagonized by the rule of the nobles, the patricians, reached unprecedented levels of violence. Thanks to the expansion reached in the Italian peninsula between the 3rd and 2nd century BC, the amount of land at the disposal of the Roman Republic grew exponentially, and together with it, also productive means and wealth, now centered around the ancient noble families which descended from those same initial tribes in which the first king Romulus subdivided his city. Inequality was rampant and was quickly accelerating to a breaking point which would outpace any reform carried out in an orderly way. In order to go forward in our tale and to understand the place in which the murder took place, let's come to Julius Caesar, the protagonist of our story. He was born from one of the oldest and most celebrated patrician families, the Julii, which according to the legend could trace their lineage back to the legendary hero Aeneas, fleeing from the city of Troy before Rome was even founded, and by extension, even to the goddess Venus herself. Despite being born in such a prestigious and old patrician family in the Senate, before even coming of age, Caesar was well framed into the Marian faction of the Populares, fighting for reforms such as land redistribution and extension of civil and citizenship rights to plebeians and the rest of Rome's Italian allies. This, because despite being of noble blood, his family did not really have great economic means, and also because Caius Marius, the historic leader of the Populares faction, was his uncle by marriage, having tied the knot with his paternal aunt Julia. Due to his close proximity to Marius, in his earliest years, Caesar was sent away from the city, in fear of being victim of Sulla's proscriptions lists, returning only after his retirement and ultimate death. What followed in the next years would have been his quick and brilliant ascent to power, walking up the ladder of the cursus honorum in the various offices offered by the Roman Republic. The moment, however, which probably cemented his fate was the pact made together with 2 other rising stars of the Republic, Pompey and Crassus. Together, in 60 BC, they decided that instead of spiraling down in civil war like other prominent commanders of the time, such as Marius and Sulla, they would try to help each other further their political ambition in a sort of secret deal. The result would be that each one of them would start rising in wealth and popularity, taking control of public offices, armies and regions, under the quiet acceptance of the Senate. Caesar, after a series of political and military successes in the context of the triumvirate, obtained the government of the province of Gallia Cisalpina, Cisalpine Gaul, extending over northern Italy. Together with the province, he was also given an army and absolute power over the region, which he used to expand it by waging war against the tribes in the north, in what is modern France, Germany, and even Britain. With the end of the war in the north, Caesar's government over the province of Gallia Cisalpina was coming to an end, after which, by law, he would have needed to relinquish his legions and return back to Rome, effectively landless and powerless. Instead of doing so, in a famous turn of events, in 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army, which represented the ancient border after which the province of Italy was started, defying the Senate's orders to disband and signaling the beginning of a new civil war. His actions led to a direct confrontation with Pompey, who was supported by the Senate. Caesar swiftly defeated his forces in several decisive battles, including the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC. At the end, Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated, meeting his end. With his rival eliminated, Caesar found himself in the position of having at its back an army loyal to him, hardened by decades of battles, immense wealth accumulated through his conquests, and no serious political opposition in the Senate. If he wanted to, he could have named himself king. Under many points of view, that's exactly what happened. Returned to Rome in 44 BC, he was named dictator ad perpetuum, dictator for life. His accumulation of power, along with a series of reforms aimed at centralizing authority, alienated many senators, who feared the end of the Republic. It is here that we can come back to the Curia. Caesar had absolute power over Rome, and together with the reorganization of the political and religious structure of the state, he also started the process of reshaping up much of the architectural landscape of the city. A new forum, right next to the original one, was in the works, in which also a rebuilding of the Curia was started, which would have later brought to the ultimate incarnation of the building, which to this day is still visible and known as Curia Julia, named after Caesar himself, inserted in the forum that would be also known as Caesar's Forum. At the time of his assassination, therefore, the original Curia, at the feet of the sacred Capitoline Hill, was under reconstruction. The Senate would be carrying out its sessions in some other place. The location was the so-called Curia Pompeia, or Curia of Pompey, Caesar's rival, which was part of a larger building complex which consisted of the first brick theatre built in the city of Rome. In this area, we are away from the ancient center of the city, in a plain, the Campus Martius, Field of Mars, so called since originally it was here that military exercises were carried out, where the 7 hills give way to a large field, ultimately sliding down into the river. The fact that the murder did not take place in the original Curia gave life to a mystery in our story. For centuries, in fact, it was not entirely clear where Caesar met his hand. As time passed and the city went through its several metamorphoses, the grandiose complex built by Pompey and its surroundings were all lost. Until the end of the Roman Empire, it managed to survive, maintaining its prestigious character of a large, grandiose theatre capable of housing tens of thousands of people. Alas, perhaps due to this same characteristic, just like it was for several other public monuments, it caused its ultimate destruction during the Middle Ages. As we have explored already in some of our other films, in those centuries Rome suffered a staggering depopulation, arriving at its lowest point to count only 10–15,000 inhabitants. The theatre of Pompey, therefore, just like the Circus Maximus or the Colosseum itself, were basically used as quarries, spaces from which to pick up marbles and other materials to erect much of the city's villas, basilicas and churches, as we see them nowadays. Over the centuries, the entire area was covered with meters of debris and dirt, and other buildings were raised on top of that. In order to uncover the Curia of Pompey, we would have needed to wait until the 20th century. In the more general context of the many modifications operated by the Kingdom of Italy at first, and the fascist regime later, the area was supposed to be heavily restructured. As highlighted in the regulatory plan of 1909, the small neighborhood from the Middle Ages was supposed to be completely eliminated to give life to a square. Once the first buildings were demolished, however, in 1926, remains of temples from the Roman Republican era were found. The man responsible for the archaeological survey, Giuseppe Marchetti Longhi, understanding the potential of the discovery, personally asked the then Prime Minister Benito Mussolini to stop the demolition project, and to instead reconvert it into a full archaeological excavation site. The result was what we see today, the sacred area of Largo Argentina. From an archaeological point of view, the site is still very active, and changes are made every year. The last section was opened to the public as close as 2023, so chances are, if you are seeing this video some years into the future, there might be some addition. However, as it stands now, the site comprises 4 temples which span from the 4th all the way to the 1st century BC. The very last part of the area, behind the circular temple, represents the perimeter of what remains of the unfamous Curia of Pompey, and as such, it has now been identified after centuries of mystery as the place in which the murder of Caesar took place. And it is precisely here, in the sacred area of Largo Argentina, that every year reenactors meet in order to put the event into play. we have finally reached the ending point of our story, the one that most people know and have heard of. On the Ides of March, in 44 BC, a group of senators assassinated Caesar, believing in this way they could restore the old republican system. Why did they do it? It was the result of a combination of rivalry, fear of tyranny, and the ambitions of those involved in the plot. Caesar's desire to be declared dictator perpetuum, meaning dictator for life, alarmed many of his contemporaries. At the same time, many of his policies during his rise to power had brought about reforms to the Roman Republic, such as land redistribution and debt relief, while also concentrating immense power in his hands. Many senators feared that Caesar was on the verge of establishing a monarchy, effectively ending the republic, undermining their power, but also their capability to counteract it by curtailing their economic means and their control over the people. These concerns, along with his growing influence, made him a target for those who believed that his death was necessary to preserve Roman freedoms. The conspiracy was led by Marcus Junius Brutus, a senator and descendant of the legendary hero of the monarchic Roman times Lucius Junius Brutus, who killed the tyrant king Tarquinius the Superb, effectively giving life to the republic. They were joined by over other 60 senators, who called themselves the Liberators. Like we explored at the beginning of the film, Caesar was scheduled to attend a meeting at the Theatre of Pompey. As he entered, he was surrounded by the conspirators. According to historical accounts, including that of the historian Suetonius, the conspirators attacked him in a coordinated strike. Caesar was stabbed 23 times, with some accounts suggesting that his last act was to cover his face with his clothes. Following the death of Caesar, the city was under turmoil. Despite his excessive and incredible concentration of power, he was very loved by the people, weary and tired of the rule of the nobles. During the funeral procession, Caesar's body was displayed, and mourners, many of whom had adored him, participated in a grand procession through the city. It is in the Forum that his funeral would be celebrated, and it is in this moment that the famous speech of Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal ally, was enunciated. Unfortunately, no record of what exactly was said has reached us. We can only imagine, also thanks to the mind of several authors who attempted to imagine it before, first and foremost Shakespeare himself. What we know is only that delivering a stirring eulogy, showing even the bloody toga in which Caesar was assassinated, and reading Caesar's will, in which he distributed money to each free man in the city, he turned public opinion in his favor and against the conspirators. The funeral, meant to calm tensions, instead set the stage for further unrest, leading to a power struggle. Caesar's assassination did not reverse the tide of Roman history. His death led to another round of civil wars, which ultimately saw the rise of his adopted heir, Octavian, later Augustus, who became the first Roman emperor. Thus, the transformation of Rome from republic to empire was solidified, with Caesar's actions setting the stage for the imperial system to take root, that would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. But that is another story.